I like this conference because this is the time when TV people have to shut their mouths and listen to people who really know what they're talking about and really work hard at what they're doing. Our keynote speaker this evening, Lindy West, really doesn't need much of an introduction. I'm sure that you've all heard the name. Lena Dunham calls her an essential and hilarious voice for women. Lindy's ferociously witty, outspoken, tackles topics as varied as pop culture, social justice, body image. Her empowering work has garnered a coast-to-coast audience following the publication of Shrill, her highly anticipated literary debut in May of 2016. Lindy's rocked readers and listeners in work published everywhere from The Guardian to GQ to This American Life. She's a catalyst for a national conversation in a world where not all stories are created equal and not everybody is treated with equal respect. Shrill's comprised of a series of essays that those essays share her life, including her transition from quiet to feminist out loud, coming of age in a popular culture that really is hostile to women, and how keeping quiet is not an option for any of us. I might add that it was announced just a few days ago that the Hulu TV and Lorne Michaels are producing an adaptation of Shrill starring SNL's Adie Bryant. So please join me in giving a Texas welcome to Lindy West.
Hi. Oh boy, this is big. There's a lot of you. It's so nice to be here. I mean, really, it's just such a pleasure. I just want to say up front, really quick, that I'm an opinion writer. So there's going to be some opinions. And I want to remind you before I start telling you my opinions that guy earlier said that the Dallas Cowboys were losers. So I want you to think about that when you are thinking about who you're going to be mad at later. All right, here we go. So, in February 2017, on the first day of Black History Month, President Donald Trump, and if any of you have been trapped in a mine for several years and you just escaped and you came straight to this conference, I have quite a bit of bad news. Or good news, I guess, depending on who you are. So President Donald Trump gave a speech that at the time felt truly astonishing, though I doubt most of us even remember it at this point. But it went like this. I'm going to read you the whole thing because I just have to. Okay. So this is the speech. I'm not going to do like a voice, but imagine his voice. Okay. Well, this is Black History Month, so this is our little breakfast, our little get-together. Hi, Lynn, how are you? I assume he pointed to a black lady. Just a few notes. During this month, we honor the tremendous history of African Americans throughout our country. Throughout the world, if you really think about it, right? I guess. And their story is one of unimaginable sacrifice, hard work, and faith in America. And I've gotten a real glimpse during the campaign. I'd go around with Ben, parentheses Carson, to a lot of different places. He didn't say that, I'm just in case you don't know who Ben is, but you should. A lot of different places I wasn't so familiar with. They're incredible people. So he just told you that Ben Carson helped him discover black people. Last month, we celebrated the life of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whose incredible example is unique in American history. You read all about Dr. Martin Luther King a week ago when somebody said, "I took the statue out of my office." It turned out that was fake news. Fake news. The statue is cherished. It's one of the favorite things in the, and we have some good ones. We have some good things in the. We have Lincoln, and we have Jefferson, and Martin Luther King. But they said the statue, the bust of Martin Luther King, was taken out of the office, and it was never even touched. So I think it was just a disgrace, but that's the way the press is. Very unfortunate. I am very proud now that we have a museum on the National Mall where people can learn about Reverend King, so many other things. Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I noticed. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, and millions more. Black Americans who made America what it is today. Big impact. I'm proud to honor this heritage and we'll be honoring it more and more. We're going to need better schools, and we need them soon. We need more jobs. We need better wages, a lot better wages. We're going to work very hard on the inner city. Ben's going to be doing that. Big league. That's one of the big things that you're going to be looking at. He must have ad-libbed. I hope this wasn't written down. I don't know which is worse, actually. We need safer communities, and we're going to do that with law enforcement. Sure, okay. We're going to make it safe, and we're going to make it much better than it is right now. Right now, it's terrible. Okay, so that was his statement honoring Black History Month. Black neighborhoods are terrible, and I heard that this Frederick Douglass guy is really hot right now. So then later, a reporter asked former Press Secretary Sean Spicer, RIP, about Trump's weird Frederick Douglass reference, and he said, well, I think there was contributions. I think he wants to highlight the contributions that he has made, and I think through a lot of the actions and statements that he is going to make, I think the contributions of Frederick Douglass will become more and more. Okay, so just to recap, the President of the United States apparently believes that Frederick Douglass is still alive. And instead of correcting that misconception, his press secretary backed him up on it. Sure. So anyway, Donald Trump, who has access to nuclear weapons, he's also I'm getting to a point eventually, I promise. It's not just me reading stupid things that the president said, although that would be fun in a sort of devastating apocalyptic kind of way. He's also a self-professed superfan of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. He's not here, right? He's not. Not that this is the kind of place he would be, but I know he lives in Texas. Right? He does. That's not your fault. Okay, it's fine. So Trump has appeared on Jones's radio show. He called it amazing, and he vowed, I will not let you down. I think we'll be speaking a lot. Earlier this year, or I guess it was last year, I don't know when it was, but Trump pushed one of Jones's conspiracy theories claiming that the dishonest press is covering up terrorist attacks by Muslims in order to coddle ISIS. Seems true, sure. A few months ago on the Alex Jones show, of which again the president is a fan, guest host Owen Schroyer delivered this opening monologue. Welcome into the Alex Jones show, folks. It's amazing, here we are. So much news, and the news is so big, and the news is so frequent that the biggest news every day becomes a back page story the next day. The Las Vegas massacre cover-up? Nothing. The JFK files being declassified? Hitler is still alive. All the history textbooks lied to us. I was lied to my entire life. About JFK, knowingly by my government. I was lied to my entire life about Hitler, knowingly by my government, and that's just a non-story now because you've got another radical truck running people down in the streets. Okay, so once more to recap, the president treats as a real legitimate news source a program that just reported that Hitler is still alive. Not even Hitler didn't commit suicide in 1945, but Hitler is alive today at 128 years old. Okay, so my point. 128, okay, it's impressive. I guess never mind. He did claim to be better than other people, I guess. I could stand here and list Trumpian rewritings of reality all day. the thousands and thousands of terrorist sympathizers that supposedly cheered in the streets of Jersey City on 9/11, the 3 million undocumented people who supposedly voted in the 2016 election, Barack Obama's birth certificate, Mexico sending their rapists, climate change is a hoax. Those are a few of the most egregious ones. But the subtler, policy-based lies are even more frightening. The notion that tax cuts for the obscenely wealthy will do anything for the struggling poor and middle class. The idea that isolationism and xenophobia make us safer. You guys are going to start to get mad at me if you're not already. Let's see. Sure. One defining aspect of alt-right white supremacy is that it vehemently denies its own existence. They're just trolling. They're just defending free speech. They're just anti-establishment firebrands. We're told that voting for racist policies is not a racist act. We're told that sexual assault is not a misogynist act, that mocking the disabled is not ableist, and vowing to deport Muslims and Mexican immigrants is not xenophobic. Trump can rend immigrant families in the name of heart, destroy healthcare in the name of life, purge minority voters in the name of justice, and roll back women's autonomy in the name of freedom. It's a brazen denial of reality and the meaning of basic English words. The erosion of language is an authoritarian tactic designed to stifle dissent. If you can't call something by its name, then how can you fight it? With universities and public education and arts funding in jeopardy, it is the duty of every single individual to protect and nurture the truth, to hold the line in their own lives and industries. I often hear the word storytelling derided as something fanciful, something soft, separate from the hard stuff of real life. But in a world where so many are willing to throw away the rights of the other for the illusion of safety, storytelling is our most straightforward empathy generator, a humanization machine. The inane lie that diversity is being foisted upon our art and media to its detriment is simply an extension of the deadly lie that diversity is being foisted upon white people, white neighborhoods and white towns to their detriment. Diversity, in fact, is the only thing that can save us. If you live in an all-white town and you've never had a chance to meet people different from you, stories can change that. If you've never met a Muslim person before, but the president told you to be afraid of them, stories can change that. If you feel like you are alone and no one in the world has experienced your fear or marginalization or pain, stories can change that. You have a real impact on which stories succeed, how far they go, and who they reach. And more importantly, which stories get thrown away and rightfully never given any oxygen ever again. I never imagined when I started my career that I would someday have to spend my time conscripting an army to help me convince millions of Americans of the not aliveness of Frederick Douglass. I truly thought we'd close the book on that one. But that's the thing, it's becoming very difficult to close the book on anything. And that started a long time before Trump. There's this pervasive misconception that's been growing really aggressively, especially over the past decade, that all ideas are good ideas, that the mere act of having an idea has some inherent value, that discourse for the sake of discourse is worthwhile, and anyone who tries to declare certain doors closed, certain ideas permanently put to bed, is a censor and an enemy of the First Amendment. You can see it very clearly on cable news, for example. We're having a gay person on to talk about their basic human rights. We should also have a guy on who believes that gay people should be electrocuted until they become straight, for balance. We're having a civil rights activist on to talk about police violence. For counterpoint, we should have someone from the KKK and let them talk unchallenged on national television for 20 minutes. We're having a scientist on to talk about climate change. We should also let Shaq come and talk about how he thinks the earth is flat because he drove all the way across America and at no point was he upside down. I don't know, we're having a veterinarian on to talk about spaying and neutering your pets. We should also probably interview a dog. If criticism is political correctness and political correctness is censorship, then aren't all ideas equally valid? Is the most qualified presidential candidate really more qualified than a person who's not qualified at all? Casting the dissent of activists and concerned citizens, people like me, who think it's about time we close the book on, say, whether or not racism is real, as a First Amendment violation is the kind of pseudo-intellectual argument that seems reasonable to people who don't have enough skin in the game to bother paying attention. Discourse course, is good. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. The more airtime we give to irrational bigots on high-profile platforms, the more assiduously we hear both sides and stay fair and balanced, the sooner they'll be rejected by the public at large. Unfortunately, as any scientist can tell you, for as long as we still have scientists, more often than not, sunlight makes things grow. Conflating criticism with censorship fosters a system in which all positions deserve equal consideration, no bad ideas can ever be put to rest, and lies are just as valid as the truth. Last fall, Trump started saying that he's not sure whether the infamous Access Hollywood tape in which he bragged about sexually assaulting women is even real, even though he admitted it and apologized at the time. And then this week the sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia, sort of a double negative. So, does it matter that Donald Trump, the guy, thinks that Frederick Douglass is still alive? In a vacuum, maybe not. But it matters tremendously that Donald Trump, the president, has so little regard for his country's history, particularly its black history, that he clearly doesn't give a shit who Frederick Douglass is. And it matters even more, it matters very greatly for our collective future, that he can say so on television and the entire country doesn't pass out. So, I'm here to say to you, okay, we have to get a fucking grip. It is absolutely fine and normal for us as a society to build some shared standard of ethics and truth. In fact, it is vital. It's vital that we declare certain conversations closed. We no longer need to waste public bandwidth debating whether or not gay people and women and black people and immigrants and Muslims are human beings who deserve equal rights and opportunities. Framing those ideas as two sides of a debate just validates dangerous lies that should have never been on the table to begin with. So, there's more. Now I'm going to talk to you about abortion, okay? Now I'm going to talk to you about abortion because I think it's an instructive example of the importance and the power of storytelling. And I'm going to use the word abortion about 7,000 times because we've spent the past 50 years stepping around it like it's the plague, and now people treat it like the plague. Even people who think abortion should be legal are afraid to say it out loud. And you can't fight for something that you can't say out loud. So, 3 years ago, I was in the thick of writing my book. My deadline was looming, and I was embarrassingly behind and starting to imagine doomsday scenarios in which I had to pay back my advance and go into hiding. And at the same time, national hysteria about baby parts was at its peak, and my feminist friends and I were vacillating between rage and panic. I was writing in a cabin in the forest in Maine, which is terrifying. I mean, it was very beautiful, but then there's a thing called nighttime that I don't recommend. I was writing at a cabin in the forest in Maine when my friend Amelia Bono texted me. I just barfed my whole abortion story on my Facebook page, she said. Amelia and I had recently told each other that we'd had abortions, and neither of us were sure why we hadn't talked about it before. We weren't traumatized. We weren't ashamed. They'd made our lives better. It was just something you weren't supposed to talk about. And if we were caving to that imposed secrecy in liberal, pro-choice Seattle, that's where I'm from, if you can't tell, by this abortion speech, what kind of shame and stigma were conservative women, rural women, women of faith shouldering? We realized that the only people who felt free to talk about abortions and specifics were those advocating for its eradication, and their specifics were lies and propaganda. Why weren't we owning our own stories? Why weren't we telling the truth? Why were we caving to a stigma that we didn't even believe in? Stigma breeds silence, and silence is a vacuum that bad faith actors can fill with whatever stories they want. I realized in that moment that despite growing up in progressive Seattle with a mom who was a nurse, who performed abortions, I heard very little truth about abortion. The most progressive line was safe, legal, and rare. Abortion was a complicated debate, and people who got abortions were either pitiable or irresponsible. I didn't hear any stories like mine, abortions that weren't traumatic, that weren't regretted, or obtained under desperate circumstances, but were just young women exercising their constitutional rights to steer their own futures. So here's what Amelia wrote on Facebook. And I think this is really important. Even if you disagree with me, I think this is really important. Hi guys, she said. Like a year ago, I had an abortion at the Planned Parenthood on Madison Avenue, and I remember this experience with a nearly inexpressible level of gratitude. Plenty of people still believe that on some level, if you were a good woman, abortion is a choice which should be accompanied by some level of sadness, shame, or regret. But you know what? I have a good heart, and having an abortion made me happy in a totally unqualified way. Why would I not be happy that I was not forced to become a mother? I put it on Twitter and I added the hashtag #ShoutYourAbortion. It immediately took off in a way I'd never imagined. Women from all over the world began sharing their own stories with us. Amelia and I began hearing from women who'd been suicidal over the shame of their abortions and felt free for the first time, and not only free, but part of a global community declaring sovereignty over their bodies. We heard from women in religious countries who'd had illegal abortions and risked ostracism from their families, or even violence or incarceration if they spoke openly about owning their bodies and futures. We heard from women who'd had to abort wanted, non-viable fetuses at 24 weeks, who were tired of their personal trauma being used as a bargaining chip. We heard from defiant high school students and women who'd had illegal abortions pre-Roe and our own mothers. Clearly there was a need here, a yearning to tell those stories. Here's my abortion story, the abridged version. In September 2010, I took one pill and then another, and I lay in my bed for a night and a day, and then I was not pregnant anymore. It was a fairly smooth experience, distressing only because my relationship was bad, and I had no money. Paradoxically, one of the reasons I'm so determined to tell my abortion story as often and as loudly as possible is that my abortion simply was not that interesting. It was a medical procedure that I needed. When it was over, it was a relief, and only a relief. And I know that's startling for some people to hear. We're conditioned to speak about abortion with reverence and a bit of melancholy, if we speak about it at all. But feeling relieved after my abortion did not make me part of some radical vanguard. It made me utterly mundane. 95% of people who have abortions report feeling that they made the right decision. My relief didn't just place me in a majority, it placed me in a supermajority. I'm part of the 95%, and 95%, as any fifth grader can tell you, rounds up to pretty much everyone. And that's not to say that abortion stories which are more complex or more painful than my own, stories of trauma, of abuse, of malpractice, of confusion, of impossible decisions, aren't important. They are, and they are real, valid, vital threads in the vast tapestry of human experience. The fact that abortion stories are not a monolith is an indication, surely, that abortion should not be treated like one. We cannot legislate away regret. All we can do is empower every human being to make informed, sovereign decisions over their lives. And quickly, 8 years later, I'm married to my best friend, I'm raising 2 children, I work for the New York Times, I'm here talking to all of you. I have no regrets. I'm not sorry. We cannot effectively advocate for something like abortion in the abstract. Abortion is good for women, families, communities, and the proof is reflected in our own lives. Many of us have our careers or our children because of our abortions. Some of us would never have survived our abusers or our addictions without our abortions. 1 in 4 of us have had lives that were determined in monumental ways by our abortions, and the vast majority of us do not regret our decisions. But if nobody will admit that they've had one, we are not able to illustrate the connection between having an abortion and living better lives. Contrary to what the pundit economy would have you believe, abortion is also not particularly controversial. According to the Pew Research Center, nearly 70% of all Americans oppose overturning Roe v. Wade, while 75% of Democrats believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Those are not numbers that indicate controversy. And yet, in spite of those numbers, abortion bans and restrictions have been shuttering clinics at an unprecedented rate. leaving 7 states with only 1 clinic, and 90% of counties in America with none. Regardless of legality, access to abortion simply does not exist for millions of Americans, and now, with the looming retirement of Justice Kennedy, we are all, in all probability, going to lose Roe v. Wade entirely, and many, many people will suffer and die. So, how did we find ourselves in a place where abortion access is being regulated in a way that is so profoundly out of step with public opinion? The answer is relatively simple. Those who oppose abortion have dominated the conversation by framing it as murder. The left has never figured out a compelling way to advocate for abortion rights because the anti-choice movement has relentlessly flooded the discursive field with so much propaganda that even those who support abortion rights often do so from a place of apology. Those seeking to regulate reproductive freedom have intentionally created a cultural climate where talking openly about having had an abortion is a liability that most people are understandably unwilling to accept. And the media buys into and reinforces that construct. Hearing both sides, when one side is demanding basic humanity and the other side is advocating for dehumanization, is not neutral. The truth is neutral, and the truth is that abortion is and has always been a part of normal human life, and that is not spin or bias, it's the opposite. This happened, this is happening, this will always happen. People who believe in the absolute right to abortion don't have control of Congress, we don't have control of the executive branch, we don't have control of the dozens of state governments that have vowed to immediately ban abortion once Roe is overturned. So take heart if you disagree with me. You're in the lead. All we have are our stories. All we have is culture change. Culture change is not frivolous. It's not soft journalism. On a long enough timescale, culture change is policy change because changing minds changes votes. So, in case it's not clear, I am talking to you about abortion today because this country is drowning in false equivalencies. The loss of language, the loss of a shared standard of truth will be the end of us. Our media is not equipped to deal with weaponized nonsense. We waste whole news cycles on whether or not it's okay to punch Nazis, or when does Louis C.K. get to have his comeback, or was Kathy Griffin too mean, or Donald Trump says something like, women are dogs and dogs shouldn't be allowed to have abortions because then there'll be no more puppies. That's not a real quote, but it could be. You never know. And then cable news and Twitter spend a week screaming that it's objectively untrue that women are dogs when, we know that they're not. Come on. We don't have to debate it. Meanwhile, 1/4 of women have abortions and no one ever talks about it. And many of those women find themselves dragged into the "are women literally dogs?" debate because they've never felt comfortable speaking the plain reality of their abortion stories. When we don't hear people's stories, our collective reality becomes warped. Whether we're talking about rape culture, or abortion rights, or cops killing Black people, it is impossible to create a better version of normal until we hear from people who are experiencing what normal is right now. It's not a coincidence that Me Too is a Trump-era movement. Me Too is a storytelling movement, because people are desperate to share and understand some objective reality in the midst of this Hall of Mirrors hell house. Because nobody feels like they're allowed to speak about rape and trauma and abortion and racism without leveraging their credibility, without being called oversensitive or tedious or a liar or a snowflake or a slut or a professional victim, without having to endure a year of stalking and abuse on Twitter or rebuttal from someone who wants them and their family dead. On some level, there's no change without storytelling. We can march twice a year, we can argue in the abstract, but it's ludicrous to think we can address a problem like sexual violence in a culture where these stories are suppressed. Storytelling matters because once we've declared ourselves, there's no going back. You cannot make me pretend to regret my abortion now that I've said it into a microphone. You cannot force millions of gay and trans people back in the closet. You cannot strong-arm people who love Black people and Muslim people and immigrants into not caring about Black and Muslim and immigrant lives. You cannot make women forget what it feels like to have careers, to thrive and excel, to earn money, to be independent, to choose our own futures. You cannot turn us back into incubators once we have almost been the president. Storytelling matters because if our leaders are actively hostile to reality, it's our job to protect and preserve it. We can choose to say yes to the truth and protect the truth tellers and leave the lies dead and buried. Sometimes darkness is the best disinfectant. Thank you. Thank you. So now we do Q&A. So feel free. Or do you, do you come back up? I don't know how this works. Are you leaving because you're mad at me? Thank you guys. Thank you so much, really. I really, really appreciate all of you listening. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Oh no, I want you to stay right there. We're going to have a microphone. There's a microphone here. There's a microphone over there. I'm going to change things a little bit this time because sometimes I've been to a number of these, and if you've been to a number of these, sometimes the questioning can go on for quite a period of time. TV people don't know anything about microphones. Am I talking? Can you hear me now? All right, there we go. Sorry. I'm going to change it a little different. We're going to do 20 minutes of questions. Okay? This is the official clock. So, there's a microphone there. There's a microphone right there. I ask you to come forward. As you come forward with your questions, we clicking on and off? As you come forward with your questions, let me start with, I believe you're not on Twitter anymore.
No, I quit.
Maybe you can tell people about that. Having some difficulty with it. Maybe you can tell people about the reason why you have made that conscious decision.
Absolutely, yeah. So I left Twitter like 2.5 years ago. I was a very active Twitter presence. I loved Twitter very much. I love arguing with weirdos. Genuinely, I genuinely did love it. But I mean, if you want the whole story, if you haven't had enough anti-Trump sloganeering, I guess it's not sloganeering, you know what I mean, stumping. It was when Donald Trump started to like taunt North Korea about their nuclear program, and he was like, I've got a bigger missile than you, or whatever. And I was like, I gotta go. Like, I feel like if this is what this platform is for, I don't know that I need to be in here with that guy. Like, it just seemed sort of like an endorsement, and I feel like Twitter has not done the work to make its platform safe and inclusive for all users, especially marginalized people, and it is a hotbed of hate and abuse. And I was like, I think that probably in good conscience, like if my coffee shop regularly held like neo-Nazi rallies, I would stop going there. And Twitter's a company like my coffee shop, so I was like, I'm gonna go to a different coffee shop, which is no coffee shop, because there's no. But it's great. It freed up a lot of my time because I spent a lot of time arguing with 13-year-olds about the economy.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first, I just want to say I want to read every book you ever wrote, every
Thank
essay
you.
and every manuscript.
Thank you. There's only one so far, although I have a deadline.
Well,
So.
One of the things that's never, ever talked about with the pro-life group is bringing back orphanages.
Mm-hmm.
It's never mentioned. I've never heard it said.
Like who wants to pay to take care of unwanted children?
Or children whose mothers die because they had a medical condition and they were forced to have a child and it killed them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's a punishment for disobedient women. Forced childbirth is a punishment for disobedient women. No one is lining up to take care of them financially, to take care of their children financially. There's a lot of logic missing in the conversation because the reality is if you talk to abortion care providers, it's not just people like me having abortions. It's conservative women, it's rural women, it's Christian women, it cuts across race and class and geography. And so this is basically what I'm talking about. We are not reckoning with reality, because that's the reality. The reality is that abortion care providers see people who were outside protesting at the clinic last week come in with their teenage daughter to get her an abortion. So what I'm advocating for is that we speak about these things honestly, because dishonesty is toxic, and it hurts people, and it kills people. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk this evening. It was very lively and political.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate what you're saying about storytelling. I'm a professor in the English department here at UNT, so I'm all about stories. And it sounds like what you're advocating is that we really need to, tell more and more stories to promote a better sense of justice. And to better represent what's actually going on. But I think we really need to leverage our privilege towards advocating for justice, because it's often the most vulnerable who can tell the best stories. So we have lots of advocates in the room here that help to tell those stories, but how do you propose that we get more people in positions of privilege to be able to advocate for that sense of justice?
Oh gosh. I think having conversations like this and really, convincing people with privilege to do things is hard, because privilege makes you feel entitled to not do things. For me personally, and it's complicated. Like, I always want to also acknowledge when I talk about stuff like this, it's safe for me to tell my abortion story. I'm not going to be ostracized by my family. I'm not going to be ostracized by my community. I'm not going to lose my job. I'm probably not going to get murdered, although you never know. Seriously. That's the thing that happens. You didn't know. The pro-life people murder people. But I just think being loud and staying loud, and also leading by example. In my job, public speaking, if I'm invited to be on a panel and it's all white women, I say no. I say, please give my space to a more marginalized person. Or if someone, and that's an easy thing to do. It's an easy thing to do. Although it also involves giving up money, giving up opportunities. You don't have to, a publication asked me to write a piece, an essay about the Matrix, recontextualizing it now that it's known that it was made by 2 trans women. And I said, no, thank you. Please give that assignment to a trans person, because not just because it's the right thing to do, it will be a better piece. It will be a more nuanced piece. So I guess I just think it's important for those of us who do care to lead by example and to make space, give up opportunities, give up money, give up financial opportunities, and buy people's books. Pay attention to who's out there writing and amplify their work. Hire them to write things if you run a publication. There's a lot of things that we can do. It just takes a little bit of intention and staying conscious.
Yes, ma'am.
So you kind of started to talk about it there, but my question was about the problem that's happening within feminism right now. I think Pantsuit Nation group on Facebook, in case you weren't a part of that, kind of identified just the women of color who were feminist versus white women in that space, and what it looks like, and what that means for feminism as a group, because it tends to be it feels like where we are right now, that you can't talk about nuance because we have to hold our line so much, and you can't give any bit, a little bit at all. And so how do we address those things? And I know, not that I've made you the feminist to speak for all feminism, but you are someone who represents those kinds of ideals and where we're all headed. And so how do we kind of bridge that place where everyone has a voice, but where we can have difficult discussions? I got into it with someone IG today about sex workers, and I was like, really, like, can't we just have a discussion that acknowledges all these things, but yet also says, like, what does consent look like, and talks about it. I think your Aziz article that you wrote about that issue kind of delves into that, you know, like, what does that look like, and how do we kind of move it forward?
Yeah, I think what you're asking is, like, in order to make progress, we need to cast a wide net, but if you're gonna cast a wide net, you're gonna have some bad fish. What's the metaphor fell apart. But, you know, catch apples in a net, so then anyway, I mean, it's complicated, you know. I think it's just important to, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's important for people with more privilege, such as, you know, white women like myself, to have difficult conversations with other white women who maybe don't understand how intersectional feminism works. And I mean, the quickest explanation of that is, you know, if I'm not fighting for the most marginalized people, the people who are the least heard, who have the most challenges, who are the most oppressed, if I'm not fighting for those people and stretching my, you know, making my feminism include the fight for them and prioritizing that, that means I'm fighting for me, which is, like, if I'm, like, okay, let me, hold on. Hold on. Sorry I keep breathing into this and making that horrible noise. If I'm not fighting for black women, that means I'm fighting for white women, and that's white supremacy. Do you know, does that make sense? You don't need to explain to you. But it's my responsibility as a white woman to have that conversation with other white women and make sure that we enforce those standards, maybe in a gentle way so that people don't leave. But the thing is, like, if you're willing to leave a social political movement because someone was mean to you, you didn't really believe in it in the first place. So, I don't know. I think, I don't have a good answer. I don't like coddling people, though. You know what I mean? Like, I think it ultimately, when you sort of allow people to be shitty, then they don't learn. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, it's okay to be shitty, so I'm just gonna be more shitty.
But how do you have the discussion that isn't just, that's it, like, you're shitty, we write you off, right? So how do you have the discussion where they grow?
I mean, I think...
Because I think Dan Savage has a great podcast where he talks about when you come out to someone and your family, you give them the space to mourn and grow and move forward.
Yeah.
And you don't just like, oh, you weren't cool with it, like, second that I did it, like, you're out. So that's kind of it. Like, where does feminism go where we grow and bring people? Because a lot of people are never Trumpers, right? So they're Republicans who aren't Trump supporters, but they're not going to join the other side because they feel also alienated. So I mean, I think you can kind of tell who is reachable and who's not, and who it's worth it to try to connect with and who it's not. And I would say prioritize those things. You know, don't waste all your time and all your energy on people who will never ever agree with you. And if you think that people are reachable, yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that I've said tonight, everything that I believe is based in having compassion for other people. And so I think it's absolutely important to have compassion for people who disagree with you. And I think absolutely, I mean, those conversations are important as long as, but I guess it's just most important to not place those conversations on marginalized people. So, you know, you and I have a huge responsibility in that. But it's also really powerful to show people that, like, to set hard boundaries like you would with a child. Like, this is absolutely not okay. And if people really do care, they will find that, you know, jarring, and they will be curious, and they will hopefully come back to learn why that wasn't okay because they genuinely care. You know what I mean? Sorry that was so long, and I didn't have a good answer. Please forgive me.
Yes.
First, you know how to get a guy's blood pressure up. I'll tell you that.
I told you before.
And I'm deplorable and unreachable. But second, I want to share my story. my oldest daughter had a child out of wedlock. And she was like you, in a bad relationship. But her daughter was adopted in Edna Gladney in Dallas, in fact. And now he is a 27-year-old boy with 2 loving parents, productive society member, I'm thinking. My daughter stays in touch, kind of in touch. But anyway, that is an alternative. And paid for, so if you talk about financial, they paid for everything. And it came out as a different outcome than abortion. Now, anyway, I just want to share my story on that.
Thank you. Absolutely. Of course, people are aware of that option, but, I hope that you recognize that that option comes with, 9 months of physical changes and pain and exhaustion that you, as a man, will never have to experience. And exacting a physical toll from women as a punishment for sex out of wedlock is not something that I believe in. And what I believe in is everyone owning their own body and making their own choices. Just like if I was sick and I was going to die tomorrow, I couldn't come to you and say, you have to give me your kidney or I'm going to die. I'm going to cut you open and take your kidney. Because you own your body. You own your body parts. And there's a life on the line. My life, I'm going to die. I need it. You have to give it to me. And you don't. And I think you feel that innately, that you don't have to give it to me. Why should I have to give you my kidney? So, even if you seem like a nice guy, so maybe you would, because you like me. But, of course, and I wouldn't want her to change her decision. I'm not advocating for more forced abortions. I am advocating for the right of everyone to make their own decision. And she made her decision, and I'm so happy. I'm so thrilled that she was able to make that decision and that it worked out for her. What a joy. That's wonderful. And it doesn't work out so well for everyone. And, we could relitigate the abortion debate here all night. And obviously it's not one that comes to easy conclusions, but
It's
no.
a Dallas case.
It's a Dallas case.
It's a Dallas case.
Well, thank you, Dallas, for your 45 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Ashley Ibarra, and I was wondering what inspired you to use comedy to write articles about political and social issues, especially issues that I know, like the discussion earlier about like white feminism against, like, I just love that you're so inclusive about like what you speak about. So I was wondering what inspired you to use comedy to make it more appealing to all audiences.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Like, I guess my speech wasn't very funny, but if you can make something funny so that people want to read it because it will make them laugh, they'll swallow much more difficult political ideas than if you're just lecturing them about difficult, challenging political ideas. So I've always thought of writing in a funny way as like hiding a pill in some applesauce, or you know what I mean, like tricking your dog into taking its medicine. Not that I think of my readers as dogs. That was rude. But you know what I mean? Like it's just humor is disarming, and it's very, it's just a great way to connect with people. And like, we're all people, I'm a nice lady, even if you're mad at me. Like, I'm just a person, I care about people, and trying to have a good time in my life and take care of the people around me. And I love my country, and I think humor is something that's very relatable, and it helps people connect in a time when it's not always easy for people to connect. So if the funnier you can make something, the more challenging you can make it, you know what I mean? Or the darker you can make it, and the more difficult things you can talk about.
Let me say now, because I see the lines getting longer. We've already gone over 20 minutes. I hear people say keep going, but
hold on.
Let's take a poll. Who wants to keep going?
Don't I get a vote?
Who wants the bars to reopen? Yeah, that's kind of. Here's what I'll do. I'll tell you. Here's what I'll do. We'll take. Let's take 3 more questions, and then she will. I will tell you that she will be available, by the way, outside with the other authors after this is over. We do this simply because it does at some point become difficult for other people. So let's take 3 more. Hey, that night, you like how I did that? So let's take your question, ma'am, and then one more, and then after that, you'll be taking questions outside.
Oh
right?
boy, all right.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Vic Holmes, and I also work for UNT Health Science Center. As one of the LGBTQ community, my husband and I thank you for your mentioning of us, because it actually took a court case for us to be human, so that was nice. But now that we are, we're not going to lose it. And I appreciate your comments about us as privileged individuals, because everyone has a privilege of some kind, and using that privilege to essentially peer pressure our friends into not doing the things that we think are unacceptable. That's really, I think, where that goes. But when we're talking about stories, one of the things that my husband and I had to work with when we were doing our court case was the stories, making it human. We had to be human for everyone to understand that we were real people, not numbers on a piece of paper. And at some point, it becomes difficult for the public to understand it's just one story after another after another. There's all these people with all these stories, and it seems like everyone has a story, and everyone does. But how do you rein in the boredom from the stories? How do you keep people interested in the fact that you're still people, you're still women with needs, you're still black people with needs, you're still people that need some sort of interest in them? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, by the way, you shouldn't have to tell a compelling story to have human rights. I mean, it's actually outrageous. And I know that I just made a 30-minute speech about storytelling, but actually I find it infuriating that, especially stuff like Me Too, like, okay, I have to go tell everyone about the intimate details of my sexual assault in order for you to believe me and care about it. You should believe me and care because I'm a human being, not because there's a salacious story attached to it. So, I mean, the idea that we don't, there is something, there's something very intrusive and presumptuous about, demanding that people earn their humanity, that people prove their humanity to you, and that people don't have a right to privacy and don't have a right, to medical privacy, and don't have a right to, keep their traumas to themselves. But unfortunately, I mean, I guess that's why, like I said earlier, the stakes are low for me to share my story, and so I do. I've made that choice. But it's certainly not compulsory. I would never tell people that they had to share the most painful, most secret details of their lives. But those of us who can, I think it's important to do so for the sake of people who can't. And in terms of, overload, I don't know. I mean, if tough shit if people are getting bored. You know what I mean? I think that at a certain point, saying something over and over and over and over and over does eventually get through. You know what I mean? But maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. I just don't know any other thing to do.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Peggy Little, and my first published story back in 1987 was about my illegal abortion in Germany, as I was an exchange student. You asked for stories. I have been waiting all these years since my story has already been published and I can't re-enter it anywhere, for someone like you, who's just now asked for such stories, to start a collection of such stories and edit them so that the stories can get out. That's all I wanted to say.
Actually, my friend Amelia, who started this whole thing, there's a book coming out, I think in the fall, that she edited of abortion stories and art pieces and personal narratives about people's experiences with abortion, all kinds of different experiences, you know, a full spectrum of different people. So I think it's just called Shout Your Abortion, so you should look for that. It's a really incredible piece of art.
Great,
Yeah,
maybe she can do another edition.
Okay, I'll call you for the edition 2.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Kennedy, and a few weeks ago I was told that, well, wait first, I just loved everything that like makes you you. Like
Thank
just
you.
all of that is just like really beautiful and like good job, like good. And a few weeks ago I was told that to be a journalist you can't tell your opinion because your opinion doesn't matter because people want to hear the story. So you have to differentiate those two things. So I just wanted to know, how do you have these strong opinions that are like, opinions that like I hold, but how do you tell those opinions without being silenced at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I'm an opinion columnist, so I'm paid specifically for
Yes.
my opinion. But I mean, I also think it's a fallacy that there's some kind of objective journalism that doesn't have any kind of opinion infused in it, because someone's choosing which stories to publish, someone is choosing which stories not to publish, and which writers to hire and which writers not to hire, and how these pieces are edited. You know what I mean? Like there is humanity all up in every single piece of journalism, no matter how objective it wants to be, even if you want it to be, you know, purely objective. So. You know, that said, as a journalist, you still do have a responsibility to follow the, you know, ethics of journalism and the standards and practices, and, you know, get quotes from all parties, and you know what I mean. But like, I think you can still make choices in terms of what you pitch, whose stories you look for, and how you know, how hard you fight to get them published. I mean, and there are publications, like, so I started at The Stranger, which is a weekly, an alt weekly, so we published all kinds of wild shit, you know, like, everything has, you know, has an angle. And so it kind of depends on where you want to work, and, I mean, there are people here who know a lot more about this than I do, people who work at straight daily newspapers every day. But yeah, I mean, you can always be an opinion columnist. if you really want to just write your opinion, it's pretty fun.
Thank you. This is our last question.
Not so much a question, but in regards to the gentleman's comments, I have to take medicine to save my life. And if my birth control ever fails, the medicine that I take causes catastrophic birth defects, and pregnancy would be very unsafe for me. So I will need, should I ever fall pregnant, a safe and legal abortion. My life depends on it.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And when I said earlier that everyone has a right to medical privacy, she shouldn't have to come and announce that into a microphone for us to just go ahead and give her the right to the health care that she needs. So anyway, thank you all so much. I really, really appreciate it. This was wild, and
Let's give Lindy a big hand.
come talk to me at the book signing.